Are you tired of the same boring and unhealthy diet of corporate media propaganda and the distraction du jour? Your antidote is here at Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox. Real, revolutionary, and relevant news and talk with fascinating and brilliant guests. Prepare to be informed and motivated with your friend and host, Cindy Sheehan.
Welcome back to the Soapbox. I'm your host, Cindy Sheehan. This week, we welcome back a frequent guest and friend of the show, Dakotah Lilly. And Dakotah and I will be talking about the deepening U.S. contrived crisis in Venezuela. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with Dakotah. Dakotah Lilly, welcome back to Cindy Sheehan Soapbox.
Thanks again for having me, Cindy. Always a pleasure.
Well, in this age of corona, 24/7, every day, all day. There are a lot of other things happening in the world that I think needs to be addressed. We need to highlight them. We need to figure out what's happening, and some extraordinarily devious things have happened between the U.S. and Venezuela. If we can even call relations between U.S. and Venezuela. And recently, something that got very little attention was some mercenaries, were trying to sneak into Venezuela. They say to kidnap Maduro, but I really think they tried to assassinate Maduro. So I think maybe a little bit of background, and then talk about that incident. So you're one of my leading go-to people about things happening in Venezuela.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. As most of your listeners probably have an inkling of, the United States has led a campaign against Venezuela ever since the election of Hugo Chavez over 2 decades ago at this point. And this has taken on a lot of different facets, from the economic sphere, sanctions, embargo, to direct coup support in 2002, to an assassination attempt against President Nicolas Maduro in 2018. And a lot of this has been with the support of many Western governments, Western, essentially proxy states of the United States, such as, obviously most of the European Union and a lot of the right-wing governments, that some of them of which have been installed by coups themselves in Latin America, like in Honduras, or, the narco state in Colombia, and the fraudulent Bolsonaro administration in Brazil have been some of the biggest cheerleaders for regime change in Venezuela. Now, this hybrid war has kind of reached a really interesting stage because all these attempts have been unsuccessful. There's been some mutinies of a handful of soldiers here, a handful of soldiers there from Venezuela's forces. There's been, obviously the economic situation is still a big question because of these very, very strangling sanctions. The Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, Steven Mnuchin, said that the goal of the sanctions, the goal of the embargo, is to, quote, asphyxiate the Venezuelan economy, obviously echoing Richard Nixon in the 1970s, when he said that he wanted to, quote, make the Chilean economy scream when they elected Salvador Allende, a socialist popular unity government. So there's a lot of parallels. This isn't a new thing, but what's interesting is they're kind of throwing everything at the wall, hoping that something sticks, whether it's the economic war, something in order to erode the popular support that Chavismo has in Venezuela. And obviously this has been successful because a couple years of difficulties is nothing compared to the years and the transformative changes that Chavismo did in Venezuela, whether it's healthcare, education, housing, employment, wages, really transformative things in the everyday Venezuelans' lives. Really great things, and an absolutely astounding model of democracy, one of the best electoral systems in the world, a constitution ratified by the people, et cetera, a real socialism of the 21st century, as Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro both said. But what's new is that on May 3rd and May 4th, there was a group of mercenaries, which they were almost all United States and Colombian people, which they tried to get into Venezuela with their stated goal of either assassinating or capturing Nicolas Maduro. And these people were trained in Colombia on the border, with help from people in the United States, people in Colombia, and with signed agreements with Juan Guaido, the opposition leader in Venezuela, offering these people millions of dollars to do so. It's a vast network. It's a vast, almost conspiracy of people who are close to Donald Trump. Some of Donald Trump's personal security team members were aware of the plan, such as Kevin Schiller, I believe his name was, who's been Donald Trump's head of security for decades, actually. Jordan Goodrew, who is someone in the United States who is the CEO of Silvercore, which is the mercenary company, the mercenary private security company that was utilized by these people. He has made public a contract which was signed by Juan Guaido and J.J. Rendon, who is Guaido's number one in the United States, based out of Miami, which offered over $212 million dollars to Silvercore.
Where does this money come from? Where's all this money coming from to pay this?
See, and that's, the Trump administration, and some people say that they have no idea about this. Obviously we all know that Juan Guaido was pictured with very notorious drug traffickers and drug kingpins in Colombia. So this money is not, it's my guess is that some of it comes from drug money because of the infiltration of drug cartels into Juan Guaido's camp, as well as some of the accounts frozen by the United States, such as Citgo, which Citgo is a Venezuelan subsidiary owned by the Venezuelan state. The United States government has frozen that money and given it to Guaido for him to do whatever. Obviously this is not cheap, $212 million, as well as all of these boats, this ammunition, all of this is millions of dollars of military equipment. So while perhaps, they say that the United States government wasn't involved, obviously they allowed for this to happen. Obviously they supplied money, the weapons came from somewhere, and people very high up in Trump's inner circle knew that this was happening. So it's another way. It's very similar to their Syria strategy. They can supply weapons and money and empower these groups, these terrorists, but they can say, oh, well, we didn't know that they were, Wahhabi terrorists. We didn't know that these people were trying to assassinate Maduro, blah, blah, blah. But obviously that's not exactly true.
So a few weeks ago, I interviewed Whitney Webb about Venezuela and what's happening, and her conclusion, or her opinion, is that there might be like a Panama-like style invasion of the U.S. into Venezuela. So do you think all this is leading up to it? Do you think that this little jaunt that they did, I mean, how did they think that they were ever going to be successful, for one thing? But do you think that this is just like they're trying everything they can to undermine the Bolivarian Revolution, to get rid of Maduro? And if this isn't working, which it isn't working, could it lead to a U.S. military invasion?
Well, I think the coup plotters, all the people in the United States government, I think, for as terrible as they are and as war criminal-like as they are, somewhat intelligent people. And as you said, they're kind of throwing everything, hoping something sticks, hoping something accomplishes their goal. However, obviously that hasn't happened. But I think they know that, obviously Trump says that a military option is not off the table at this point. But I think a lot of the upper echelons of the ruling class know that it's not going to be like Iraq. It's not going to be like Afghanistan. There's millions of militia members and communes and, very sophisticated Russian and Chinese weaponry. And, there's just a very vast fighting force in Venezuela that have been emboldened and radicalized by the Bolivarian Revolution and aren't willing to just, lay down and kind of take it. I also think a lot of the ruling class oligarchs in other Latin American countries, as squalid and terrible as they are, know that an invasion of Venezuela would mean, it would be very terrible for the region. Whether or not they care, that's another question.
One of the leaders in Venezuela said it would be like Vietnam if the U.S., decided to go with a military invasion. And of course, the similarities would be, the Vietnamese people rose up against the U.S. military, and it was a very long and bloody war, but eventually the Vietnamese people were victorious, and like you said, regionally it would be a terrible thing to have to go through.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's correct. I think it would actually be a lot worse for the United States and Vietnam, because a lot of the peasantry in Vietnam fought against the United States, but the people in Venezuela are much more armed. They have training. Millions of people, grandmothers, are involved in the Bolivarian militia. They have, they're not special forces, but they know how to operate a gun. They know what they're doing. Because, for as smart as the ruling class in the United States is, the Bolivarian Revolution is much smarter. They have the support of the people. They have these militia members, these communes, these social organizations, all these people who are willing to put their lives on the line for the Bolivarian Revolution. And, the military has remained 100% behind Maduro. Chavez was a military man. He knew about the importance of a civic military alliance, of a military that didn't oppress the people but worked in tandem for social good. And that's what we see in Venezuela. And I think they know just how difficult it would be. Plus the support of modern technologies, anti-aircraft missiles and such from China and Russia. It's very important, obviously, because the United States wasn't able to defeat Vietnam. They haven't been able to defeat Cuba, and Venezuela will be yet another country that they will not be able to defeat because of the popular support and the resolve of the Venezuelan people.
Right. And so talk about what happened on May 3rd and 4th a little bit. I know what happened. I'm not really clear on the details. I know I watched the interrogation of one of the Americans who was there. And the person who was asking the questions, he said, how would you feel, or what would you think if we went to Washington, D.C. and tried to assassinate your president? And I'm paraphrasing, I'm not saying it exactly like he said it. And then the American was like, well, I wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
That would be awful. And the Venezuelan said, well, how do you think we feel with you coming in here? And the guy's like, I really thought that you wanted Maduro out. I thought he was very unpopular. I don't believe he thought that. I believe he's a mercenary, and I think all he cared about was money. I don't think he has any ideology except for, getting his hundreds of thousands of dollars for this one, failed operation.
Mm-hmm. And then plus you have the 15 or 25, I forget the exact number, millions of dollars that the United States has on Maduro's head. So there's a lot of money in this.
Right.
And so, yes, so in the lead up to the May 3rd and May 4th operations, there was actually a lot of weapons were discovered on the border between Colombia and Venezuela. And Venezuela knew everything that was going on. That's why it was very easy for these people to be captured. So they found a lot of weaponry, again, munitions and vehicles and very ISIS-style, weaponry. Which isn't cheap, yet again. And so in the lead up, they tried to get to Venezuela by boat. So they left Venezuela, or they left Colombia, or they left some of the Caribbean islands, and they sought to get to Venezuela by boat. And actually, at first, it was everyday Venezuelan fishermen who discovered what was happening, because they were alerted by the Bolivarian government as to what was going to happen. And these fishermen, who are dedicated socialists, held them at gunpoint. And with the assistance of the National Guard and the militias and such, they were able to apprehend these people. And two of them were United States citizens who, they had their U.S. passports on them. They had their VA. They were in the United States military. And, they were, just chess pieces. The real people are Alcala, a man who deserted from the Bolivarian government a couple years ago and is now wanted for drug charges in the United States. And Gudru, the CEO of Silver Corps, who is in the United States. J.J. Rendon, Guaido's number one person in the United States who signed this contract with Gudru. But their stated goal was to cause chaos and essentially hope that a coup would happen, and if not, they would take out the top echelons of the Bolivarian Revolution. So Tarek el-Assami, Diosdado Cabello, Nicolas Maduro, and other high-ranking people. And again, this isn't something new. People have known for a long time that there was a lot going on in Colombia between narco-paramilitary groups, Guaido's representatives, and private mercenaries. And even more so, they also sought to take over an airport, which is just a couple kilometers from Caracas. So if need be, they could transport Maduro out of the country and perhaps get that $15 million. So, these are people who are way in over their heads. Perhaps, again, as you said, they were mercenaries, very money hungry. They really thought that they had a chance. I think people really just tend to underestimate, because we constantly hear in the media, we constantly hear talking heads. Maduro has zero support. There's not one person in Venezuela who will do anything for Maduro. And that's just simply not true. Whether it's people who are in the government, people who are in the armed forces, whether it's people who you see on the streets. I've seen it with my own eyes. People do support Maduro. People do support Chavez. They do still support the Bolivarian Revolution. But on top of that, I think it's interesting that the governments of Colombia and the governments of the United States claim that they had no knowledge. There was a Daily Mail article that alleged that different security agencies like the DEA and the CIA did have advanced knowledge.
Of course. Please, give me a break.
Yeah, of course they did.
Advanced knowledge. They were probably in on it from the very first second.
Yeah, absolutely. And that we know 100% to be true as well, because Gudru and J.J. Rendon and all these people have met multiple times, as well as with Kevin Schiller, who was head of Donald Trump's security for many years. And Silver Corps, the mercenary organization, actually provided security for Trump on several of his speeches or whatever, as well as at the Venezuela Live concert held by Richard Bronson in the Colombian border with Venezuela, where they tried to get military hardware and deserters in between Colombia and Venezuela. It's very sophisticated, but also not at the same time.
Right. Well, talk a little bit about excuse me, talk a little bit about like Juan Guaido. You said that he was the opposition leader, but it's almost like here's Maduro and his party and defending the Bolivarian Revolution, and then there's this organized group of counter-revolutionaries led by Juan Guaido. I don't necessarily think that that is quite the case. I think that even members of Guaido's own party don't recognize him as a leader.
Mm-hmm. And that's very emblematic of the Venezuelan opposition. There's so many different leaders, so many different ideologies, some who do try to go the constitutional path. They disagree with Maduro, but they don't want foreign interference.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Juan Guaido, who, calls for sanctions against his own country. So it's a very divided and fractured group. Juan Guaido he was the president of the National Assembly, which the National Assembly has been in contempt for many years because of its unconstitutional acts. But he was president of this body. He's actually not anymore. They elected someone else, but of course Juan Guaido didn't recognize that result because it went against his delusions as president of the country.
Well,
and
how
president.
could he be president of the assembly when he's president of Venezuela? You can't really. But what I understand about that assembly is it's not so much as like people elect somebody who they think is going to do a good job. It's almost like, well, it's this constituency's turn. So it was Juan Guaido's turn because he was elected from a certain constituency, and it wasn't like we are hoping to raise him up, and one of these days he's going to, win as president of Venezuela or anything. He wasn't even a known quantity in Venezuela, I don't think, before the United States said, well, let's just make him president.
Yeah, and maybe, that's part of their strategy. Pick some unknown young guy, and make him the president. Obviously, it didn't work. It was a terrible strategy. But before all that happened, before he was kind of launched onto the stage by the United States, he was very unknown. The vast majority of Venezuelans didn't know him. And even if you had asked 6 months ago, still a significant portion didn't, because he controls really nothing. He has a couple people who deserted from the military. He left them homeless in Colombia. He provided no support to those people, which, not that they deserve it, but he couldn't even do that. His most accomplished thing is probably being invited to the State of the Union, which Rush Limbaugh was also there, so it's not that big of an accomplishment then, is it?
Right, and all the, just disgusting U.S. Representatives gave him a standing ovation.
All of them.
Juan Guaido. And Biden, by the way, as if the Democrats or Republicans are any different, at least I don't think they're different in many things, but at least in Venezuela, they are united in overthrowing a democratically elected leader, undermining a popular revolution, and Biden recognizes Guaido as president of Venezuela.
Yeah, and as far as I know, there isn't anyone high up or known in the Democratic Party who doesn't recognize Juan Guaido. Even the poster children for a new changing Democratic Party, such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, have said they defer to the Democratic leadership on Venezuela. They have done nothing to defend democracy in Venezuela. And at the same time, AOC has posed with some of the people who supported the coup in Bolivia.
Right.
So these parties, as you said, are not different fundamentally, not for people in the rest of the world and not for the workers here in the United States. It's more of the same. It's more of the status quo. And at this point, they should think about getting a joint bank account so that the lobbyists and the banks can just make the checks out to one name. I think it would be much easier for them.
Right. So you brought up Bolivia. It's been about 6 months since the U.S.-backed coup that overthrew another democratically elected president, Evo Morales. Do you have any comments about what's happening in Bolivia right now?
Well, it's quite sad. You see a lot of the gains that were made under Morales slowly being swept away. Some of the labor protections, some of the newfound rights for the indigenous population, which makes up the majority of people in Bolivia, being swept away by an unelected, unaccountable, far-right Christian fundamentalist presidency of Janine Áñez, excuse me, with the support of the United States, with the support of regional right-wing puppet allies. It's very, I'm very thankful that Evo Morales is still with us on this stage of life on Earth. He was able to get to Argentina, and then he was able to get to Mexico, 2 countries which currently are headed by governments that are supported by the people and are not just puppets, which I'm thankful for. But my hope is that all the violence will end, and when the election is held in Bolivia, hopefully, I have no doubt that the MAS, the Movement to Socialism Party founded by Evo Morales, is the most powerful and most popular political force in the country. Whether or not the administration of Janine Áñez will allow a clean election, will allow socialism and the people to take their seat at government once again, that I'm not so sure of. But I have no doubt that the people are behind that party and that project started by Evo Morales.
Right. So what sense do you get from just the grassroots in Venezuela about what's happening now between, the coup attempt, well, I don't want to call it a coup attempt, the foreign invasion into Venezuela recently, what's happening with the coronavirus, etc. What do you I talked with Whitney about peak shale oil and how the oil market has been tanked by Saudi Arabia, and how's that affecting Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, this is a problem that Venezuela started encountering years ago.
Right.
The United States and Saudi Arabia, its Wahhabi puppet, decided to flood the international market with oil. It's an oil price war because much of the United States' ideological enemies, the government, that is, the United States government's ideological enemies, Russia, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Brazil at the time, a lot of these countries, almost all of them, have state-owned oil or state-owned natural resources. So what do? You try to starve their revenues by making the price of oil tank, by releasing your own oil, because the United States has a lot of oil. Saudi Arabia has a ton of oil as well. You flood the market with oil, the price goes down, less revenue for the Bolivarian Revolution, less revenue for Gazprom in Russia, et cetera, et cetera. But even in spite of all that, you see a model in Venezuela that does still provide healthcare and food through the CLAP system, et cetera, still supports a model of social inclusion, even with the collapse of the oil prices. In the wake of Corona, Venezuela has been very proactive. Perhaps it's because of their alliance, their close friendship with China, but they put in certain quarantining measures and certain face mask requirements far before many other countries. If you compare them to Colombia or Brazil or Chile, they have far less cases, they have far less deaths. They are doing really well in this fight. Their total number, I think, as of today, is 440 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Venezuela, which is astronomically low.
Right.
And, I've seen the pictures of, having big tanks utilized for sanitization. Every night the Caracas metro is sanitized. The Maracaibo metro is sanitized. Maduro has suspended layoffs, firings, and rent payments for at least the next 6 months. So I'm very, very proud and very, very happy to see them really waging a successful fight against COVID-19, something that cannot be said for Brazil, the UK, Colombia, or the United States, where people don't have money. People are, food lines are absolutely astronomical.
Right. People are waiting sometimes 18 hours in a food line. And, a lot of people don't understand the Bolivarian Constitution, and we should really do a program on that because it really is very, far-reaching, very, very radical, but it's also very population-centric. It's centered on the people. It's not centered on, rights for corporations or whatever. It's centered on human rights for people. And the mandate is that's the first responsibility of Venezuelan resources is to still fund education, healthcare, food, and housing. It doesn't first go to the military. It doesn't first go to, if they have a version of Wall Street or whatever. The first claim on any resources of Venezuela is to the people. And that's why like, if we had a government we could trust that said, we need to stay inside for 2 weeks or whatever, then, maybe we would be able to go, we trust our government. So what they're saying, they want to take care of us, right? But obviously they don't want to take care of us. Every measure that they've put in has made things worse and not better. Democratic governors like Cuomo and the one in Pennsylvania, your state, I don't know that governor's name. What's your governor's name?
Tom Wolf.
Okay. And my governor, Gavin Newsom, they are like housing corona patients with the elderly and in assisted living homes. I don't know if we're doing it here in California yet, but Gavin Newsom wants to do it, no matter how many thousands of people Cuomo killed doing it. So instead of like making measures that we can trust or be confident in that our government has our best interests at heart, they give all these trillions of dollars to corporations and Wall Street. I read recently that if that money was divided among Americans, people in United States of Americans, everybody in this country would get $38,000. Can you just like imagine what that would do for the economy if everybody in this country got $38,000? But instead, what they're doing is like what Obama did in 2008 when he first became president, is this massive transfer of wealth from the taxpayers, from the people, to the 1%. They're saying, look at me, I'm going on a rant right now. They're saying that Jeff Bezos might be the first trillionaire.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be like, we're not supposed to start constructing our guillotines.
Yeah, I know.
We're just supposed to just like take it. There's no rent freezes here in the United States. There's no like, it was proposed to Cuomo that maybe since nobody's going there and booking the hotels, perhaps they should put the homeless in the hotels. That was like rejected out of hand as, just something that is, we don't do that here in the United States, which is why we don't trust our government that they have our best interests at heart.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much that people can do. Well, there's so much that this government could do, the richest in the history of the world. To make this crisis, this battle, an actual, struggle in the economic, all these different sectors. People are suffering. People don't have food. People can't pay rent. People can't do anything. And no one really seems to care because we have to provide $1.5 trillion to Wall Street.
And several trillions of dollars every year to the military-industrial complex, which isn't just the Pentagon. There's many aspects of the military-industrial complex that get that money. So if you're looking at the Pentagon's budget, which is hundreds of billions of dollars, they don't factor in the other things that are going towards the military-industrial complex that might not necessarily be in the Pentagon budget. Like the deep state, like the nuclear program, which is run through the Department of State for some reason.
Its tentacles are everywhere. And, I have hope one day it won't be like that, but it won't be for you or I. It'll be for the generations yet to come.
Well, gosh, I hope so. I think people talk about the new normal, and our old normal was so abnormal that, I just think that I I don't think the path we're on is going to create a better normal than we had before, but we just need to keep pushing, and there needs to be a vanguard of us out there saying, this is the way. This path might not be as easy as the one you want to go down, but, in the long run, like you said, we'll be making a stronger world for hopefully my grandchildren, your children, if those come to pass. So anyway, well, Dakotah, is there anything else you want to add?
I just want everyone to know that, again, it's very easy. The ruling class wants you to lose hope. They want you to stop trying. They want to limit your political imagination. But it's up to us to one day construct, a homeland, of the people, to break the wheels of oppression, and it will happen. I have utmost faith in that. I think it's the path that humanity inevitably will go on in this country and in the rest of the world. Much of the world has already begun this path.
Right.
So it's up to us.
Okay, Dakotah, is there any way that my listeners can get a hold of you? Or I know this is a very weird time where a lot of us are not, I don't even know. All I'm doing is a soapbox. So, there's not a lot of other things like going on right now, but I know you're on Facebook, you're on Twitter.
Yep, I'm on everything. Twitter is Gringo Chavista. Instagram is The Gringo Chavista. Facebook is Dakotah Lilly. And, I look forward to people asking questions or, anything. So I really like that.
Just one last question. Do you think people are more aware of what's happening in Venezuela? Do you think that they're rejecting some of the dominant narrative on Venezuela?
I think so. I think, it takes a little bit for people to get there. Even if you look at Trump supporters, a lot of them voted for Trump because he said he wanted to get out of Syria. He wanted to get out of the Middle East. It was a huge mistake, cost lives, cost trillions, and all that is true. He's done, pretty good progress towards peace with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Which drives the Democrats crazy.
Yeah, which I find bizarre.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to nuke Russia, which also drives them crazy.
It really does.
At the same time, there's this posturing towards China and towards Venezuela. But after so much, the working people of the United States are just so tired of war. They are. There are some holdouts, but I believe that people genuinely don't want to see, their fellow human killed by, their fellow human. It's not a way to live. It's not a way to continue policy. And I really do think that public opinion is on our side.
Well, Dakotah Lilly, thank you so much for coming on Cindy Sheehan Soapbox again. And hopefully we'll chat soon.
Definitely. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the Soapbox for this week. I'd like to thank Dakotah for his very learned and powerful insights into the situation in Venezuela and the rest of Latin America. I'd like to thank my engineer, Don DeBar, and as always, I'd like to thank you for listening to the show. I am Cindy Sheehan. You have been listening to the Soapbox. Peace out for now.